Copyright Figu, 1998/2021. Translators, DeepL Translator. Date of original translation, Saturday, 7th September, 2024. Corrections and improvements made, Joseph Darmanin.
An interview with Billy Edward A. Meier on the topics of the mission and teaching of the creation energy.
1. When and how did your contacts with the extraterrestrials begin? How long will they continue?
My contacts with human beings of extraterrestrial origin began in the 1940s, when I was still 3 years old. My first contact was an old man whose name was Sfath, and who spoke the dialect of our village of Bülach, that is to say, a somewhat broad Swiss German. It all started on a beautiful sunny summer morning when I was standing with my father behind our house, next to a large walnut tree. Suddenly, I felt an inner urge to turn my gaze to the so-called Eschenmoserberg, as a result of which I saw a silver flash of lightning up there in the azure sky, shooting towards the church tower. It only lasted a fraction of a second before the silver flash shot over us and disappeared over the forest about 5 kilometers away. I could see that it was a large, round metal disc. When I asked my father what it was, he replied that it was probably Hitler's latest secret weapon. I could not believe it, and so from then on, I always watched the sky, seeing traveling stars in the sky at night, which were not aeroplanes. One day, I felt impulses inside me, and somehow I heard a voice that kept talking to me, until one day it asked me to go to the so-called Langensinggin in the Herregenwald, and wait there for what was announced to me, namely that I would be visited there by a pear-shaped flying apparatus. So I followed the call and went to the named place. Once there, it wasn't long before a silver pear-shaped flying apparatus descended and landed. Then a very old man got out, who spoke to me in a friendly manner and explained that he was Sfath and came from a foreign planet, and that he had many things to talk to me about and many things to teach me, and so on. That was my first contact with a human being of extraterrestrial origin. From then on, there were many contacts with Sfath, which ended in 1953 and were continued by a woman called Asket until 1964. While Sfath came from the Pleiaren, Asket came from the DeepL creation, which is a sister creation to ours, a twin creation. No further contacts took place until 1975, after which they were resumed on the 28th of January, 1975, by a girl from Era, a planet in the Pleiades system that has nothing to do with the Pleiades stars we know. The name of the new contact was Sim-Ya-Se, and the contacts with her only lasted into the early 80s. She was joined by her sister Plagia, her father Ta, and a commander called Ketso. Other contacts since then have included girls called Telida and Manara, etc. The official contacts ended in the early hours of the 3rd of February, 1995. But this does not mean that the contacts were broken off for good, only that the official contacts ceased to exist, because the Pleiaren had fulfilled their task on Earth. The human, private, and unofficial contacts will continue to be maintained until I pass away and leave this life. However, these contacts will no longer be as frequent as they were until the 3rd of February, 1995, and perhaps it will also be possible to record contact conversations here and there and pass on information.
2. Is it possible to get a rough overview of the human races in the universe?
In terms of creation, 40,353,607 different pure human races were originally created, which emerged naturally and evolutionarily from many planets in many solar systems in many galaxies throughout the universe, and which therefore developed from the natural biological evolutionary processes of overall planetary development. The process was that the planetary flora emerged first, namely through certain amino acids and amino acid compounds. The natural process of growth and decay led to a further natural coincidence. That is to say, a further meaningful meeting of cause and effect, which resulted in new amino acid compounds from which the fauna then developed, the animal world. While the flora initially consisted only of lichens and similar plants, animals now appeared as the process progressed, which lived from the plants as well as from the fact that they themselves served as food for each other. These animals were also part of the process of becoming and passing away, so they also deposited substances and died, which in turn triggered new biological chemical processes, from which new amino acid compounds and new life forms emerged. This time, it was the human being life form, which was divided into many races, 40,353,607 of them, as already mentioned, which also had a total of 343 different skin colors. All these human beings were also different from one another depending on the living conditions on their home worlds and the atmospheres, etc., but were unmistakably of the human being species. Thus, gnome-like as well as dwarf-like and tall human life forms emerged, including dwarves, giants, and titans, etc. Among these, however, there were also small dwarfs. Among these, however, there were also dwarves, who probably belonged to the same species of their race, but did not reach their full normal height due to genetic defects. However, these dwarfs had nothing to do with dwarfism, because the dwarfs were actual breeds, and this has remained the case to this day. There are still short people today, also here on Earth, who are unfortunately labeled as Lilliputians, according to the fictional story of Gulliver's Travels. On Earth, we have different sizes of human beings, who also belong to different races, such as the small pygmies, then the normal grown, who are in the majority, as well as the giants among the Earth humans, such as the members of the Watusi and Maasai tribes.
3. Where do the extraterrestrial intelligences you are in contact with come from, and why are they visiting us on Earth?
The extraterrestrials I am in contact with come from the constellation of the Pleiaren. However, this constellation is not identical to the Pleiades, which we can see in our space-time continuum from Earth at a distance of around 420 light-years. Because they are only around 62 million years old, and, as blue, hot suns, are absolutely incapable of supporting life in any form, neither in a purely creative energetic, nor in a material form. The Pleiadians of the extraterrestrials exist in a different space-time continuum, one that is shifted by a fraction of a second from ours, and that can be broken through via an artificially created dimensional gate at the Pleiadians visible to us, from where it is then another 80 light-years to the constellation of the Pleiaren, as the extraterrestrials call their home system, but which means nothing other than Pleiaren, as we call them in our language. Just over 50,000 years ago, when the extraterrestrials found and also colonized the Pleiaren stars and their planets. They named them Pleiaren in their language after the Pleiades, because they were practically only to be found just beyond the Pleiades that we know here on Earth. The Pleiaren visit us on Earth because they have a certain connection to a certain group of Earth humans who originally came to Earth from the Lyra Vega systems, whereby these Lyra Vega systems are also shifted in time and space to the ones we know. These primordial Lyran Vegans caused some mischief on Earth among the Earth humans in the earliest times, as a result of which the teaching of creation energy, and thus also the creation-compliant way of life of human beings, was lost, although other factors also played a part, which had nothing to do with the Lyran's vegans, but with other extraterrestrials who carried out genetic manipulations on human beings, who then came to Earth and mixed with others, ultimately affecting all of humanity on Earth through inheritance and re-inheritance. In order to repair the damage and misdirection caused, the Pleiaren feel obliged to bring the necessary teaching and information to Earth humans in order to repair the damage caused by their direct ancestors, and also the damage caused by other intelligences.
4. Can you tell us how such a contact works in practice, in the past and today?
To make contact during the first few years, I often had to drive many kilometers around the area on my moped until I was finally telepathically guided to an extremely lonely place or a remote forest clearing, where they were usually already waiting for me with a landed beamship or appeared after a few minutes. Sometimes it took several hours to finally make contact in this wise, simply because there were always people everywhere, or because I was being followed, both during the day and also at night. Sometimes I was allowed to take people with me, but they had to wait at least 500 meters away from the contact point, but often saw the approach or departure of the beamships, or even flight and energy-burning demonstrations. Later on, when we were already living in the Simya, say, Silver Star Center, I was only rarely ordered out into the woods for a contact, but was usually simply beamed up into a beamship, whereby this also happened here and there to such an extent that I was beamed up from the middle of a group of people, as various people can testify, as well as the fact that various group members saw the beamships or their demonstrations, or even the extraterrestrials themselves on various occasions. In the last few years, from 1982 onwards, after I had a very serious breakdown that damaged my health, and from which I recovered only with great difficulty and was closer to death than to life for years, until 1989, the Pleiaren visited me directly by beaming into my office or directly to me when I was alone somewhere outdoors.
5. How long does a Pleiaren spaceflight from their home worlds to Earth take? And how do they manage to cover this astronomical distance of around 500 light-years?
At the beginning of the contacts, the approach from the space-time continuum of that dimension beyond the Pleiades, visible from Earth, took around 7 hours. Over time, the approach was reduced to 7 minutes as the technology was further developed. The latest form of travel is designed in such a way that any distance in the entire universe can be bridged absolutely timelessly, and without any loss of time by using transmitters. In the early days, beam drives, tachyon drives, and antimatter drives were used, with the latter two achieving multiple faster-than-light speeds, which made it possible to cover huge distances in a short time. These techniques are also still in use, along with the latest travel option with transmitters, which can be used to program the destination coordinates practically to the meter and reach the destination without losing any time.
6. Why don't the extraterrestrials land in public? For example, in front of the UN Palace in Geneva or the White House in Washington.
There are many reasons for this. Of real importance, however, is the reason anchored in a directive, which states that the Pleiaren may not interfere in any way in the affairs of any humanity on any planet, and may not make themselves recognizable if the humanity in question is not itself capable of space travel to a good degree, and has not yet attained the standard of ethical and humanistic peaceableness and humanity, as well as cosmic connectedness with all life. So the aliens of the Pleiaren are also not allowed to show and move openly and freely.
7. Why does Billy Eduard Albert Meier, of all people, have contact with the Pleiaren and no one else?
The reason is to be found in a millennia-old past, when my form of creation energy existed in human beings who had committed themselves to a certain mission by their own decision. This mission became a long-lasting task for the total consciousness, which is capable of reincarnation, together with the creation energy form over many reincarnations and millennia, right up to the present day. In the process, the overall consciousness, which originates from higher levels, adapted to the lower forms of consciousness existing on Earth, while retaining the ability to also remain adapted to the higher forms of consciousness. And so, if I can maintain contact with the Pleiaren today and in modern times, it is only because my overall form of consciousness can be assimilated to those of these highly developed extraterrestrials in terms of consciousness, which is only possible for me on Earth. Without any other human beings on Earth possessing this ability, which also makes it absolutely impossible for other inhabitants of Earth to maintain any contact with the Pleiaren. Over all the millennia, respectively tens of millennia and millions of years, my form of creation energy naturally always remained the same, while the total consciousness capable of reincarnation, however, changed, as is given and normal through the unstoppable evolution, whereby with each reincarnation a new consciousness and thus a new personality was born, which could no longer have anything in common with a previous personality and will also never do so. This means, however, that it is erroneous to assume that a human being with a certain personality can be one and the same person in two different lives. Only the form of creation energy remains the same, while the personality of the consciousness changes in an evolutionary way, but this does not mean that memories of the personalities of previous lives may not appear.
8. You are in possession of by far the most extensive and at the same time best photographic and film material relating to extraterrestrial flying objects, their flight maneuvers and landing tracks, etc., which is absolutely unique on Earth. How was it possible for you as a one-armed man to take such pictures?
I have only the Pleiaren to thank for that, because they helped me in every way in obtaining all the material. They ordered me to various places where they carried out demonstration flights for my recordings, and especially just for me, in such a way that I could take pictures and films with the photo camera and film camera as I wished, sometimes with precise instructions from the pilots of the beamships. So I was instructed to make certain film and photo material with the help of my extraterrestrial friends. But I couldn't take any other photos or films without permission, because I wasn't allowed to. But if I tried anyway, I could be sure that the film would be destroyed.
9. Why were you commissioned by the aliens to take films and photos of their beamships and their flight maneuvers?
The reason was that I was to create the clearest and world's best photographic and film material of extraterrestrial flying apparatus, commonly called UFOs by Earth humans. This material was to serve the purpose of triggering a worldwide UFO controversy, so that Earth humans would finally be shaken awake in matters of extraterrestrial life, whereby the authorities and military would also be forced, in logical consequence, to make their secret findings and research into UFOs public and accessible to the citizen, whereby in certain countries mendacious UFO crash denials, as well as denials of recoveries of crashed UFOs, and their crews would be uncovered and clarified. The Plejaren were sure that this controversy could only really take place and fulfill its purpose if I distributed the film and photo material worldwide, which would automatically lead to an equally worldwide conflict between supporters and opponents of my material and my statements and contact conversations. This also happened, but my opponents could not prevent more and more supporters of my story and contacts from coming to light, and the more they tried to label me as a fraud and a swindler, the more they became. This was exactly what the Plejaren predicted would happen, namely that more and more human beings would recognize the truth of my story, the more they railed against me and slandered me.
10. What else is part of your evidence?
I received various metal samples of different stages of production from the Plejaren, which were also examined in America, with the investigating metallurgist stating that the metals must have been produced by a cold production process, which is still impossible on Earth, and may only become possible in about 150 years. Later, I received various crystals and plastics, as well as alloys of copper, nickel, and silver, and also pure silver, which originated from our sister creation in the DeepL universe. I was able to provide further evidence by recording siren sounds that could not be imitated, even with a dozen synthesizers in scientific laboratories. I was also able to photograph a laser gun and use it to shoot a hole in a dying apple tree, which miraculously suddenly began to blossom again, and has since borne fruit year after year, which was not the case before. As evidence, we should also not forget the various witnesses who were often allowed to come close to the contact locations during contacts, and who were also able to witness various blasting ship demonstrations and even film or photograph them themselves, and sometimes even see them from a distance. Evidence might also be the many predictions made by the extraterrestrials about events on Earth, both in political, military, and human terms, whereby natural disasters, etc., were also predicted with frightening accuracy and with the most precise details, all of which was and is recorded in writing and distributed worldwide.
11th. Despite all this evidence, you are accused of having photographed only small models instead of spaceships, etc. There is also talk of double exposures and other manipulations. What do you say to such allegations?
That they are unrivaled in their ridiculousness. There are enough witnesses who have seen or photographed the beam ships and even extraterrestrials themselves, and can also testify that I never made models or took them with me when we traveled together to make contacts, etc. I would never have done such things secretly. I could also never have done such things secretly because my ex-wife would never have allowed it. So I don't need to defend myself and can only laugh at the envious low intelligence of the detractors. So any further comment is superfluous.
12. How do you defend yourself against the smear campaigns launched by persons such as the American CalCorp, individual representatives of MUFON, or others?
I know the truth about my contacts, and that is quite enough for me as a defense if I were to seek one. Since my contacts with the Plejaren correspond to the actual truth, I find it neither necessary to defend myself nor to offer any form of justification. I am not upset by half-wits and complete lunatics, such as certain members of MUFON or the slanderer Calcorth, who on the one hand have also never spoken a single word to me or communicated with me personally in writing, and who on the other hand are just poor, crazy, envious people and know-it-alls who like to be in the public eye. Quite the opposite. Somehow I am still grateful to them despite their lies and slander, because through their negative actions they get many human beings to contact us at the center to inquire about the real truth, as a result of which they then begin to stand up for the truth of my contacts with the extraterrestrials. As a rule, however, all these human beings demand information about all those who attack me and insult me as a fraud, or who deceive me, as a result of which I write down the machinations of those who wish me ill and produce leaflets in which I clarify and correct the facts in order to then send them to all those who are interested. However, I do not regard this as a justification or defense, but only as intentionally important information.
13. But there are actually a huge number of contact swindlers on Earth in the matter of extraterrestrials, including also so-called mediums and channelers. Can we find out your opinion or that of the Pleiaren on this facts matter?
When it comes to alleged contact with the Pleiaren, everything is a hoax, a lie and a fraud, because there is not a single human being on Earth apart from me who would be able to maintain contact with them, both physically and also telepathically and sentiently. Anyone who claims otherwise is a liar, a fraud, and a cheat, a fact that the Pleiaren vehemently affirmed again and again throughout my contact with them. However, there used to be 5 persons who had conscious impulse contacts with the Pleiaren, but they have all died. There are also no personal contacts between Earth humans and other extraterrestrials, so any other claims are also just lies, deception, and fraud, no matter what the ladies and gentlemen call themselves and what titles they wear, who claim that they have been in contact with extraterrestrials or with spirit and light beings, etc., etc. This also refers to mediums and channelers, who are usually nothing more than deliberate liars, swindlers and fraudsters, or delusional, schizophrenic or psychopaths, etc. On the other hand, certain examination contacts, in which certain extraterrestrials get hold of Earth humans in order to examine and study them, that is to say, to examine them, cannot be dismissed out of hand. However, this has nothing to do with the nonsense that extraterrestrials would impregnate Earth women and have sex with them, etc., as this nonsense is hysterically spread, especially in America, often together with the erroneous claim that extraterrestrials massacre farmers' animals, etc. Alien flying objects and even their landings are often observed and also filmed and photographed, but things of this form cannot be called contacts. This must be realized. Contacts of the real form are only such when verbal or telepathic communication takes place between extraterrestrials, etc., and between a human being on Earth. However, no human being other than myself on Earth is yet capable of this. Just consider that all those liars, swindlers and fraudsters who claim to have telepathic contact with beings on the Pleiades would have to wait 1,000 years for an answer if they could send a telepathic message there. To be more precise, it is only about 420 light-years to the Pleiades, which we can see from Earth, and 840 light-years there and back. And since telepathic thoughts are known to only travel at the speed of light, they would take around 420 years to travel from Earth to the Pleiades visible to us. And if there were a life form of any kind on the Pleiades, which are absolutely uninhabitable and actually inhabited neither by physical nor by creation energetic or light-conscious beings, that could give an answer, then it would again take around 420 years to reach Earth. But who has lived on Earth for 840 years? So all the alleged contactees, mediums and channelers, etc., who claim to have telepathic contacts, etc., with beings from distant stars or their planets, are themselves guilty of lies, fraud, and deceit. And all of them really do not have the ability to maintain such contacts, because they have no idea how they could bridge these enormous distances with their telepathic thoughts. But I do not want to reveal the secret of this possibility here, because otherwise all the lying, swindling, and deceitful characters would suddenly claim to have this ability.
14. How did you come up with the name Billy?
It was in 1964 in Tehran, in Persia, which is now called Iran. There I made the acquaintance of a young woman from Los Angeles in the USA. Her name was Judy Reed. As I was dressed like a Westerner, because this clothing was very practical for me, she compared me to the former James Butler Hickok, that is to say, Wild Bill Hickok, and from then on called me Billy. The name stuck with me wherever I also went, and it is stuck to this day.
15. When and where did you have your first meditation session?
It was in the mid-1940s near my hometown of Bülach, in Sfath's spaceship and under his guidance.
16. You're a cautious man when it comes to meeting new people. Why do you lead such a reclusive lifestyle, given the nature of the important mission that needs to be taken out into the world?
It is certainly not out of fear of the various assassination attempts that have already been made on me 13 times. Note. By 3rd September 2015, there had also been 23 assassination attempts, even though this is repeatedly claimed. The reasons why I am holding back are different. On the one hand, I am not a guru or a cult leader, and therefore I also do not need to present myself publicly in order to gather followers or present myself as a saint, which I am not in any wise. On the other hand, I also don't want to be idolized, because I am neither something special nor someone who would enjoy being admired and marveled at. I am not a showpiece in a zoological garden, nor am I interested in being interviewed by journalists, because they are usually only out for sensationalism, whereby they also twist and falsify the truth to no end, and thus engage in mean smear journalism, which is far removed from any truth. Or they have a tendency to rubbish everything, also with lies and distortions of the facts. You don't need a guru or a sect to spread the teaching of truth. And it also doesn't require a saint or a human being who makes a big public appearance. Publicity and megalomania are just as inappropriate as image addiction and the like. What is appropriate, however, is modesty and a style of teaching that does not aim to gather followers and believers around it, but is of such a nature that only human beings seeking the truth really feel addressed, who are also willing to learn through their own initiative and according to their own will, without a guru or sect boss wielding a scepter over them. And this demands that each of these human beings also takes full responsibility for themselves, their actions and their lives in every respect, and does so with full awareness, without a religious or even sectarian belief behind it, which demands that they only believe and not think, find and decide for themselves. The importance of spreading and fulfilling the mission therefore requires that every human being is free, and, in this freedom, decides on everything and anything for himself, and also acts in this way, without a guru, master or sectarian boss, etc., in front of him, who presents himself publicly, gives orders, and demands. The human being must be free in every respect, and in this form he is also always and in every case responsible for all things in life, without an imaginary God being able to interfere, or simply a guru, priest, or sectarian boss. This is the only way for human beings to remain or become independent and be able to master their lives on their own, bearing their own responsibility. But I would take this responsibility away from human beings if I were to go public and present myself, because human beings have a strange tendency to immediately lift someone up if that someone has a certain significance in some form, and if they go public, no matter in what wise that is also.
17. How has the mission developed over the last 20 years?
Admirably good. Despite many initial difficulties, often of a financial nature, everything has developed very well. As a result, our field of work has spread almost all over the world, and we have groups and members on all continents, and even maintain contacts with indigenous people. Our enemies here in Switzerland, as well as in Germany and America, have contributed a great deal to our success. They have tried to smear me as a liar, a fraud, and a cheat, sometimes by means of large-scale, countrywide campaigns. However, their negative actions always achieved exactly the opposite of what they intended, because their smears, lies, and slander always resulted in a great deal of support for our cause, which meant that we always gained many members and friends. But it could also never be otherwise, as the old saying goes, that the truth will always prevail. And so it is also in this case, the truth will out, and the slanderers will perish.
18. It was around 20 years ago, from the perspective of 1998, that you founded the Figu, the Free Interest Group Universal. What are the aims and tasks of this community?
The aim of the Figu is the worldwide dissemination of the truth of the creational natural laws and recommendations and the way of life that human beings should lead according to them, whereby love, harmony, and human beings, as well as a purposeful evolution, should arise and be lived. The tasks associated with the teaching of creational natural truth take many forms, such as the fight against overpopulation, the fight against torture and capital punishment, the fight against discrimination against women, the fight against child abuse, animal protection, nature conservation, and help for the needy, etc., whereby we also provide help with food, clothing, medicines, household items and tools, etc. Our tasks also include life counseling functions, which are of course free of charge, as we are a non-profit-making community, strictly speaking, a non-profit-making association. In addition to spreading the truth about the creational natural laws and recommendations, our tasks also include spreading the teaching of creation energy, or creation energy teaching for short, which deals with borderline and creation energy science issues, as well as many topics relating to life, evolution, knowledge, learning, the psyche, the creation energy form, the unconscious and subconscious forms, consciousness, etc., etc. The production of writings and books is also a task of the Figu, whereby the books are distributed at cost price, and many small writings are distributed free of charge. So we do not make any profit from them and are actually non-profit making. The tasks are therefore very varied and also very time-consuming. Although the work is carried out by all members absolutely voluntarily and without remuneration during the free time that is still available after the daily wage earning.
19. What kind of human beings are members of Figu?
The members of Figu are human beings with a wide variety of characters. The professions are also diverse, ranging from ordinary laborers to professionals in many fields. There are also apprentices and schoolchildren, as well as farmers, gardeners, clerks, headmasters, teachers, nurses, cooks, laborers, clerks, kindergarten teachers, lithographers, and so on.
20. Some people claim that the Figu is also just a cult like many others. It is also said that Billy Meier is a guru. Is that true?
Of course not, because we are not a religious, sectarian, political, military, or secular community that would invoke a totalitarian and universal truth. We are in no wise perfect or perfectly knowledgeable, so we can also not spread a perfect teaching, leaving many questions unanswered. We can therefore only disseminate the truth of the creational natural laws and recommendations known to us, the correctness of which we can vouch for, and say that this is the only and pure truth that every human being can also fathom, experience and witness in himself and in the whole of nature and the environment, if he is willing to seek and find this truth. And in this respect, there is no other truth than the one that is actually given. And this is the only truth we represent. So no one is also forced or even required to believe or accept anything that they have not fathomed within themselves and recognized as the actual truth, on their own initiative and on their own responsibility, without there being any urge or compulsion on our part to believe or accept anything. We also do not have a guru, master or sect boss, etc., who would stand above the other members of the group or association. But in my personality, there is only one leader who directs everything without holding a special position. I am therefore not a guru, but also just a normal club or group member like any other, with the same rights and duties. I therefore do not have the function or the nimbus of a master or other guru in our community, even if this is so readily claimed by outsiders who have no insight into our group, but only believe in some gossip by hearsay and form their false and lowly intelligent opinions accordingly.
21. How are we to understand this when it is written in the scriptures that you are the true prophet of modern times?
I did not give myself this designation, but it was given to me by the extraterrestrials, by the plea Aaron. However, this designation does not mean that I am a human being with special powers, etc. In fact, I am just like any other human being. In fact, I am a human being like everyone else, apart from the fact that I am able to control and neutralize my swinging waves in such a way that I can maintain physical and telepathic contact with the highly developed Pleiaren, and have some abilities that other human beings on Earth do not have. But that does not make me special. The term prophet is also nothing arrogant, and just a word that is unfortunately misunderstood by many human beings. In truth, it is just another term for herald. That is to say, a human being who announces things such as prophecies, respectively, announcements, etc., the content of which is either developed by himself or taken from other sources. And when it is said that I am the true prophet of modern times, this refers to the fact that I am a herald, respectively, the herald, who was announced many millennia ago, more than 13,000 years ago. This has to do with my reincarnation lineage, in which my creation energy form and my total consciousness have already been classified since time immemorial, which at various earlier times as other personalities have fulfilled the prophet mission, as a finite consequence of which I have emerged in modern times as a new and predicted as well as predestined personality, as a herald or prophet of modern times, whereby I am nevertheless no more and no less than just a completely normal human being like everyone else. This is also not changed by the fact that I am a mediator between the Pleiaren and high forms of creation energy and the Earth humans.
22. Finally, a somewhat indiscreet question. How do you actually feel among human beings here on Earth, even though your original home was in far higher regions?
My original homeland lies billions of years in the past, but I always feel connected to it, although I cannot hide the fact that I often long for it. Nevertheless, I am at home here on Earth and have many dear friends all over the world. But that does not change the fact that I often feel extremely lonely, which is not because of my friends, but because of the creation energetic and consciousness-based world of Earth humans in general, which is a great discrepancy to the world that was, and effectively still is, my original home.
Creation Energy Teaching Interview.
1. How did our universe and our world come into being?
The universe was created by a Big Bang, which emanated from a tiny, flea-sized but enormously compressed ball of energy. This energy was initially purely of a creation energetic nature, which created itself out of itself, but led back to an energy idea of a primordial universe. A universe is also called creation, or universal consciousness, etc., whereby there are 1,049 different forms of creation. The lowest form of creation is called creation universe. The next highest form is called primordial creation, or primordial universe, and again the next highest is called central creation, or central universe, and so on and so forth. The highest form of the creation is then the 1049, which is called the absolute absolutum. It was the very first form of creation at all, which created itself out of absolute nothingness through the primary Big Bang, after which it then evolved beyond 1049 different main forms of creation to become the absolute absolutum. Jahantitians Sinan Nasord, which floats as the very highest form of creation in non-space and expands and evolves endlessly, through the wisdom of all creations entering into it, which must work their way up to the absolute absolutum. Not a single form of creation is absolutely perfect, nor is the absolute absolutum. All forms of creation, like all life in general, can only achieve relative perfection in the course of their evolution and in the course of their constant becoming and passing away and becoming again, as is the case with all life. We live in a creation universe and thus in a material universe, which is the lowest form of creation or universe, respectively. And this universe, this creation, respectively this universal consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, must therefore work its way up. It must evolve in order to one day integrate into the absolute absolutum through the change of 1049 forms of creation. In human terms, however, this development takes an unimaginably long time, and it will take more than 85 trillion years just for our creation, our universe, to transform into the next higher form of creation, a primordial creation, a primordial universe. Once the universal consciousness, that is to say creation, has reached the stage of a primordial universe, respectively of primordial creation, it creates an idea for a new simple creation, that is to say, for a material universe as we know it. The idea consists of the purest creation energy, which harbors everything within itself, in order to create for itself from within itself. As a mere flea-sized ball of energy, it creates new, enormous energies within itself, which are highly compressed until a tremendous explosion occurs, the Big Bang. Its energies race out for fractions of a second, expanding at 107,000 times the speed of light and displacing other universes in order to create their own. Space between all the countless universes or forms of creation that already exist in infinite numbers. And with this process, 7 creation belts or universe belts are also formed, one of which forms the material belt, the visible material universe, in which the coarse matter and thus gases and dust are formed, from which meteorites, suns, comets, planets, nebulae and galaxies, etc., emerge when the matter collects and condenses, which is also how our Earth came into being. So the formation of the universe and the planet Earth, as well as the foreign worlds, stars and galaxies, etc., is a creational natural energy process that has absolutely nothing to do with a creator God, but solely with creational energetic physical and material physical laws and processes that are physically and chemically founded in every form, and can also be explained in this sense.
2. Is there nevertheless a creator God?
No, in this sense there is no God. The Big Bang did not come about through the power or might of a God, but solely through creation, energetic and material physical and chemical processes that were triggered and controlled by the young universal consciousness, respectively, creation. The term God also has absolutely nothing to do with the creation of the world or the universe and the stars and galaxies, etc. Because the term God, which has existed in the vastness of the universe for billions of years since human beings can remember, embodies nothing other than a title for a human being. This title was originally called Ishvish, which translated into our languages means God. As a term, however, Ishvish, respectively God, means nothing other than Wisdom King, a purely human title that was awarded to human beings who were very knowledgeable and wise and possessed great skill in every respect. However, this term was distorted and falsified in its value by human beings on earth, especially by the original religions and those who knew how to profit from this. As a result, God was abolished as the King of Wisdom and turned into a God-creator who was supposed to have created the earth, the sun, and the universe, etc. Many even claimed that they were the creators. Many even claimed that they themselves were God-creators, such as Jehovah and many others, and were consequently worshipped and honored by those who believed in them. Thus one gave rise to the other, and soon the original meaning of the term God was forgotten, allowing the alleged God-creators to triumph in the realm of religions, sects, and in the beliefs of human beings.
3. What is creation? What is meant by this term?
Creation is actually the entire universe, the universal consciousness, the greatest power and energy imaginable in human terms. And creation is also the entire energy and consciousness of all existing life forms without exception. In its most intrinsic form, it is the purest creation energy, although in its outer forms it has countless different forms of energy, right down to the most gross matter. As creation, this all-encompassing energy of all levels and realms embodies both the creation energetic being and also the material existence. As the universe, creation is the highest form of energy and the highest conceivable active and evolutionary consciousness, whose laws and recommendations are universally valid in all levels of existence and creation energy levels, etc., and have no errors whatsoever. Creation is the most powerful force and the most powerful energy of this creation universal existence, to which nothing human is equal. And, at that day, it has nothing in common with even the tiniest fiber of a jota, with the human make of a creator God who, seen alongside creation and its power, ability, and energy, disappears as absolute nothingness into the abyss of boundless ridiculousness.
4. What role does creation play in our human and all other life?
Creation is of great importance for human beings and all other life in the sense that every life form carries a tiny piece of creation within itself, through which life becomes alive in the first place. Without this tiny piece of creation energy within itself, not a single life form could live, because this creation energy is the actual, fundamental life energy. But this in turn is dependent on the overall energy of creation itself, which spreads a subtle form of energy through the entire universe, the so-called cosmic life energy, which is absorbed by the tiny pieces of creation energy and through which they live. So this cosmic life energy can be regarded as creational nourishment, so to speak, on which all the pieces of creation energy of all life forms live. In this form, therefore, every life form is dependent on creation, but despite this, no rules emanate from it as to how, for example, a human being should organize, lead, and live his or her life. Through its laws and recommendations, creation only sets the goal of evolution and all the associated framework conditions, whereby the goal is for the human being to evolve and therefore to develop highly in terms of the energy and consciousness of creation up to its possible relative perfection, in order to one day enter creation itself and become one with it, whereby it itself also evolves. Creation might not impose any rules on any life form, so that each one can live, act, and rule as it sees fit. However, laws and recommendations are given, guidelines that say that a certain way of life produces a certain result in accordance with the law of causality, that every cause produces a certain effect. And accordingly, it is given by creation and nature that every life form can live as it wishes, that it decides for itself and fits into the laws and recommendations in one way or another. Thus, depending on how a life form leads, shapes, and lives its life, a very specific effect results for which the life form in question, and specifically the human being, bears responsibility in every respect. The creational natural laws and recommendations are based on the factors positive and negative, and consequently everything in the entire universe is also organized in this form. And since creation itself, which can also be called nature, does not make any regulations as to how a life should be organized, led, and lived, this is left to the life forms themselves on their own responsibility, which is also the case for human beings. Consequently, every human being also decides for himself whether he wants to follow the creational natural laws and recommendations in such a way that they bring him benefit and progress, or whether he wants to violate them and suffer harm. This also means that creation bears no responsibility whatsoever for any action of the human being, but that the human being is always solely responsible for everything and anything no matter what he thinks, feels, and conceives, and no matter what he might do and undertake.
5. What, for example, is such a creational natural law and recommendation?
One of the most important laws, for example, is that mistakes made by human beings should not be condemned, because human beings can evolve simply by making mistakes. This means that human beings have to make mistakes if they want to learn something. Therefore, if they make a mistake, they will recognize it sooner or later, as a result of which they will think about it and correct it. As a result, they usually become more knowledgeable and do not make the same mistake again, at least not in the same form. So he makes progress as a result. However, it is also clear from this that human beings must think carefully about all things in order to recognize mistakes and gain new results from them that lead to success and progress. And precisely this thinking in order to achieve success and progress is another important creational natural law without which no evolution is possible. A law is therefore a fixed and irrevocable rule that must be fulfilled and followed if no harm is to be done in any form. A commandment, on the other hand, is merely a recommendation that points in a certain wise direction, in which something should be done or refrained from, as a result of which good or evil, respectively positive or negative, appears. Creational natural recommendations are, for example, the following: Thou shalt not kill in degeneracy. Thou shalt not break in alliance with creation. Thou shalt not rob or dispossess. Thou shalt not curse the truth, etc., etc.
6. How did the human being come into being on Earth? Is he really descended from apes?
The pure earthly human being that was created here is a product of the planetary evolution of the Earth. First, the most primitive forms of flora, lichens, etc. emerged, from which substances were secreted that were transformed into amino acids, which formed new compounds, which in turn gave rise to higher plant forms, etc., and thus followed the path of evolution. This eventually gave rise to further amino acid compounds, from which even higher life forms were created, the fauna, the animals. These also developed higher and higher, and were just as subject to becoming and passing away as the plants. They were born and died, and their remains and their transformations gave rise to new amino acid changes, etc., which ultimately led to hominid life forms, the lineage of human beings. However, this was not yet purely human from the very beginning, but was still a form from which different lineages could develop, which is what actually happened. The first hominid life forms split into different species, from which different hominid life forms and thus their own genera also developed. However, the basic lineage was initially human, but it changed through evolution to such an extent that fundamental differences emerged. While the life forms that had remained purely animalistic continued to develop in their own species, the hominid life forms with a human character split in such a way that one lineage continued to develop in its natural, traditional form as the genus human being, while other parts split off into other species, from which the ape species emerged in a variety of forms. Nonetheless, differences also appeared in pure primitive man, so that we can already speak of different human beings at that stage of development. This is a fact that contradicts Darwin's theory, because human beings are not descended from apes, but apes are descended from human beings, as a byproduct, so to speak, of primordial human development.
7. How old is today's Earth humans?
If the question refers to the original, real Earth humans, then their age is more than 4.5 million years. However, if the question refers to those human beings on Earth who came to this world from the depths of the universe, then their age is between 6 and 12 million years. The human beings on Earth are the so-called far travelers from the depths of the universe, and their homeworlds were far away in a foreign galaxy that has long since passed away, disappeared and gone the way of the ephemeral. These far travelers from the depths of the universe, who colonized Earth and mixed with the pure Earthborn, came for the most part from the Hennick line, who was the founder of these peoples, who came from the distant galaxy to our Milky Way and settled in the regions of the Sirius constellation. Before they had to flee from there after a long time and came to the SOL system as persecuted people, where they settled on Mars, as well as on Phaeton and on Earth.
8. Is it true that human beings don't live only once?
That is correct. The human being is subject to the law of reincarnation, that is to say, rebirth. This fact also applies to all other life forms that have an evolutionary consciousness and an evolutionary form of creation energy. It is therefore true for human beings that when they die, their creation energy form leaves the physical body in this world and crosses over into the creation energy realm of the afterlife in order to remain there and learn until they can reincarnate into a material body again. The purpose of reincarnation and the many lives is that the human being's creational energy form, which is of a creational nature, can evolve together with the overall consciousness to the point where it can one day enter creation and become one with it, whereby creation itself also evolves again. Constant reincarnation therefore serves the evolution of the form of creation energy in human beings, as well as the overall consciousness, out of which the personality and the actual consciousness are formed. And in order to develop the form of creation energy in its knowledge and in its wisdom and harmony, etc., to such an extent and to such a high level that it will one day reach the relative and highest possible perfection, many lives are necessary for this, and thus the reincarnations, respectively rebirths, because it would be absolutely impossible to develop the form of creation energy to such a height in just one single life that it would become relatively perfect. This would require countless lives and reincarnations, which can be calculated in millions. The human being needs between 40 and 60 million years just to free himself from the human physical body and to be able to enter a pure disembodied world of creation energy. That is to say, 6 to 7 times more than earthly scientists claim that the universe is old. And one more thing must be clear. The views and teachings are absolutely erroneous and false that claim and state that human beings can reincarnate as animals, for example, through rebirth. Human beings are always reborn as human beings because this is the evolutionary part of creation energy within them. A human being can therefore never be reborn as any animal or anything else, but only as a human being, and as a rule, also only ever according to their race, although there can of course be shifts in this respect, but these only occur in special cases, which would go too far to explain here. Within the same framework, animals can also never be reborn as human beings, because their form of creation energy is not orientated towards this and is not destined to evolve in a knowing and wise form, as is the case with the human being's form of creation energy.
9. The term karma is also mentioned in connection with the topic of rebirth. What is to be made of this?
Karma corresponds to an erroneous teaching, just as the religious concept of atonement does in the Christian world. According to the teaching of karma, human beings are supposed to bear the burdens of their previous lives in their next life. If such a human being was good or bad in his previous life, then his later life will also be shaped accordingly after the next reincarnation. The human being is thus to be rewarded or punished in his next life for his deeds in the previous life. In other words, karma means the form of rebirth of a human being in relation to the actions in the previous life, from which the current destiny arises. Simply put, karma means that a human being's present destiny is determined by their actions in a previous life. In the case of atonement, according to Christian teaching, everything boils down to a punishment or reward after death, respectively through the last judgment. To put it simply, anyone who is of good faith and follows the rules and regulations of the Christian religion or its sects and is humble will go to heaven. But anyone who goes against all this will go to hell or eternal purgatory and eternal damnation without having a chance to recognize and rectify their mistakes. The real truth, however, is different from what is presented by the doctrines of karma and sin atonement. The human being, in order to evolve and become more knowledgeable and wise, has no other option than to make mistakes. However, through mistakes, he usually suffers damage, and thus punishes himself, if you like. However, he atones for the damage he has suffered and endeavors to rectify the mistake and the damage so that he does not commit the same mistake again in the same form. He learns a teaching from it and becomes more knowledgeable. This is the simplest principle of cause and effect. And it is precisely through this that human beings evolve and rise higher in their knowledge, understanding, and ability, and so on. And in doing so, he reaches a higher level of consciousness, which is also carried over into the next life, and thus into the next reincarnation through his overall consciousness, so that in the next life the human being can benefit from the fruits of his progress and his level of consciousness from his previous life without having to carry any burdens from the previous life. The new life is not built on the burdens of the previous life because these were overcome in their entirety in the previous life, whether good or bad. It would therefore not only be unjust, but even contrary to the law of creation, if the things of the old life were to be carried over into the new. However, the fact that this could be the case, which is also taught by religions, is sheer nonsense and corresponds to pure illogical human thinking, senses, and desires, because human beings live in a delusion of revenge that always and in every case demands punishment and atonement. In contrast, creation does not recognize such behavior. It does not know revenge, punishment, and atonement as human beings do, so it has also not created a law in this respect.
10. There are human beings who claim that they have been dead and have seen the afterlife. Is it true that this exists?
In this sense, it is not true. The human beings in question were not actually dead, but only clinically dead, which means that there was no verifiable heart or brain activity left. However, as I said, this is only a clinical death in which the form of creation energy has not yet left the body, but continues to linger in it. Consequently, the total consciousness also continues to dwell in the physical body, even though the vital functions of each form appear to have ceased. Since the overall consciousness and the creation energy form still remain in the body, which can last for seconds, minutes, or hours, depending on the circumstances. and under certain circumstances even years and decades, for example in the case of shock freezing for survival, etc., the consciousness is also still working. However, this only happens in agony form, which is why brain activity can also no longer be detected, but it does actually happen. Images then appear which correspond to the thinking and imagination of the human being concerned, but which are also characterized by the Earth-human collective as a whole. And in this deep agony state, it often also becomes possible for the human beings concerned to send out their consciousness, as a result of which they can suddenly see themselves from the outside and floating above themselves and so on. Light and darkness and beloved human beings very often play an important role in this, such as the agonizers being led into the light by light figures, etc., through dark channels, etc., from where they do not want to return, etc.
11th, is it possible to make contact with the afterlife and thus with the deceased?
No, as a rule, this is not possible. If, however, claims are made to the contrary, and things appear in this regard, then this does not correspond to the truth, but to great deceptions and self-deception, or to events that are either in the realms of the memory levels or simply charlatanry or fraud. If we now look at those occurrences that belong to the memory levels, which in parts of esotericism are referred to as the so-called Akashic Chronicle, especially in modern or Anglo-Indian theosophy, but also in anthroposophy, then the idea is held in these that the memory banks are a so-called immaterial, supersensible book of life that contains the world memory and everything that human beings think, know how, and everything else that is said, spoken, and written, as well as everything that has happened, etc. But that this is illusory. But this corresponds to illusory imaginations. If the memory levels are viewed in the sense of the Akashic records, then the situation would be such that, according to the Akashic records, all thoughts, speeches, feelings, and other impulses, as well as all movements and impulses, etc., of every human being would be stored in the memory banks of an earthly superspace. All of these could in turn be retrieved by human beings if frequencies identical to the deposits could be generated mentally, consciously, or technically. Information could then be retrieved from the memory banks in this form, which would belong to both living and deceased human beings, and could be found on their specific frequency. It would even be possible to use the stored impulses and information, etc., in the Akashic records to communicate in a logical sequence, which is, of course, nonsensical. Furthermore, if the possibility existed, such communication would also be possible with deposited forms of total consciousness in an otherworldly space. But this would have to be considered an absolute rarity, although this has nothing to do with reality, because it is not possible to talk to the deceased. The total consciousness form, which is capable of reincarnation, and indeed always only together with the associated creation energy form, is indeed capable of making split-second impulse contact with living persons in the realm beyond under certain circumstances. But this is really extremely rare, and has nothing to do with the speakers of the dead who call themselves mediums. The things that occur with mediums who can supposedly talk to the dead are therefore on the one hand based on tapping into and extracting information from the memory banks, esoterically, the Akashic records. On the other hand, however, and this is the most common manifestation, extensive fraud and swindling is practiced with such alleged contacts with the afterlife. Just as it is also the case that certain human beings, who are usually called mediums, can contact the subconscious forms of various living Earth humans in a trance state, and communicate with them. These subconscious forms are part of the overall earthly human subconscious collective, and they are then also able to provide information about the fact that life continues to exist after death because they themselves, these subconscious forms, have this knowledge and know about reincarnation and so on. However, this also shows that these subconscious forms can only reveal the knowledge that is known to them, but which can often be more than the human being is able to know in his waking consciousness. And these subconscious forms, which are also connected to the memory banks, can then very well be personalized and release information that is only stored in the memory banks and is a secret to human beings.
12. The terms channeling and medium also belong to the topic of otherworldly contacts. What is to be made of this?
A human being is called a medium if he or she is particularly capable of making a connection to a psychic realm. However, such real mediums are very rare, and there are nowhere near as many of them as is assumed, because countless human beings appear on Earth claiming to be real mediums. The truth is, however, that the vast majority of these claims are based on lies, fraud, and deception, or on pathological self-deception, schizophrenia, and delusions of various kinds. According to trustworthy information from higher levels of creation energy, there are just 16 real mediums on Earth, but they do not go public with their abilities, and therefore do not advertise or also make any financial or other worldly gains. So all those countless mediums can be excluded from the authenticity of their abilities, who go public and make profits and gains with seances. Seminars and books, as well as lectures and shows, etc., make profits and gains. With regard to channeling, the same is to be said as with regard to the first mentioned mediums. A further comment is therefore superfluous, except that it must be explained that no religious aspects appear in the real mediums, as is the case with many false mediums and with the channelers, who are often overflowing with religious sectarian concerns. Phrases, warnings, demands for humility and threats, etc., whereby their religious sectarian dependence is clearly evident and can no longer be overlooked.
13. Many human beings believe that they are guided and protected by a guardian angel, a spirit guide by God or some other higher might, by saints or by Jesus Christ, etc. Is this true? Does that exist?
No, there is no such thing in any wise, because the human being is always, and in every case, solely responsible for his or her thoughts, feelings, emotions and actions, etc. Only religions and sects of all kinds claim that a god or saints and guardian angels or Jesus Christ control the destiny of human beings and are also responsible for it. However, this corresponds to nothing more than a religious sectarian delusion that is diligently fueled by the bosses of religions and sects in order to cast a spell over human beings and bind them to them, allowing them to be fleeced and exploited financially. In reality, however, there is no creator God as proclaimed by religions and sects, because in truth there is only creation, which as a universal consciousness has created the entire universe and all things in it, including all life forms to which human beings also belong. And the creation makes no demands of human beings, and also bears no responsibility for anything that human beings think or do. The conclusion is therefore that the human being is responsible for everything and anything in every respect, and must also always bear and savor this responsibility and all consequences himself, regardless of what he thinks or what deeds and actions he performs and carries out. But this also means that the human being is absolutely independent of higher powers, and in no wise subordinate to any such powers, so that no higher might could exercise any protection, neither spirit guides, nor Jesus Christ, nor a god, saints, guardian angels, or other archetypes, etc. They are all just a work of power. They are all just the might of religions and sects that were invented and created to dissuade human beings from the truth and make them believe that they are not independent, but dependent on higher powers. And this was done from the earliest times in order to keep human beings in servitude so that they would not rebel and would submit humbly to oppression.
14. What should we say to all those human beings who believe in one God or even in several gods, as well as in saints and guardian angels, etc.?
Our teaching of the truth is not aimed at destroying religions and sects or any belief of any human being, which is why our rule is also to be tolerant and not to proselytize. From our side, we never approach members of religions or sects in order to convert them to our teaching. Our motto is that everyone should be happy with what they believe or know. So if a human being believes in a god or in guardian angels, etc., we do not try to take this belief away from them. We only intervene when human beings approach us and ask about our teaching and knowledge. This is the only way we provide information. Even if we do not proselytize, it nevertheless remains our task to spread the truth about religions and sects, which we do exclusively in our writings, which are given or sold to interested parties respectively. These interested parties, in turn, come to us of their own free will, without having been missionized by us. And of course, we then also give them all the relevant answers and explanations, etc. they require. These then naturally lead to the conclusion, as our teaching states, that human beings should not and never believe, but recognize and see the truth. It must be explained to all interested parties that believing makes people dependent and even enslaved, and often leads to fanaticism, which not only restricts freedom of thought, but even prevents and destroys it. But if a human being really wants to be free, then he must also have his own freedom of thought, through which he can decide everything and anything himself, without having to fear that the sword of Damocles of a supposedly loving, but truly punishing, and therefore vengeful God hangs over him and can fall down on him. The human being must be so free that he can make all his decisions on his own responsibility, and also carry out all his actions without first having to ask a God, a guardian spirit, or Jesus Christ, etc., for permission, or for the good or evil of the matter. Because these imaginary figures supposedly set the norm and are supposed to bear the responsibility for it. The truth is that the human being must always and in every case bear the responsibility himself for all his thoughts, feelings, senses, endeavors, and actions. As a result, he must also always decide for himself what is good or bad, respectively negative or positive, and for this he needs absolute freedom of thought and freedom of decision, without imaginary might being able to dictate to him and interfere in any way with his freedom and his decisions. However, it also follows from this that human beings must know the truth, and that knowledge is absolutely necessary in order to be able to make their own decisions. But it is precisely this knowledge that is stifled from human beings by religions and sects. Knowledge means might, and it is precisely this might that religions and sects want to keep for themselves and exploit in order to profit from it. Human beings who are deprived of knowledge become believers in religions and sects, become dog-like and humble, and lose their freedom of thought as well as their freedom of choice and overall freedom. As a result, however, they also lose their tolerance towards other human beings and their ways of life and schools of thought, etc., while they themselves become so entrenched in their faith that they only see red when their faith is criticized by people of other faiths, or simply by human beings with different views. Tolerance, however, is necessary among and between human beings if we want to live and get along with each other in love and harmony. But this does not require faith, but the truth and certainty that by nature and before the omnipotence of creation, all human beings are equal, no matter what and how they are, and no matter what race, skin color, or nationality they belong to, and no matter whether they are Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, Confucianists, or some freaky sectarians, or rich or poor.
15. The year 2000 is approaching. Is the end of the world near, as many doomsday preachers of various sects claim?
This is sheer nonsense, because just as the world did not end in the year 1000 as a result of a divine judgment, this will also not happen in the year 2000, nor in the year 3000, and so on. Prophets of the end of the world have existed since ancient times, as have fearful, believing followers of such charlatans. This also includes the Christian Church with its Bible, which threatens the end of the world and the last judgment, etc. So it is no wonder that many Christian sects and their leaders are always threatening with allegedly imminent doomsday. Particularly popular times for such doomsday prophecies by some madmen and their believers are the turn of the millennium and the turn of the century, when time changes from one millennium or century to the next. Should it actually come to pass that the earth would perish or be destroyed at such a time, perhaps by a gigantic meteorite or comet from outer space, then this would be nothing more and nothing less than a cosmic coincidence, which certainly has nothing whatsoever to do with the revenge or judgment of an imaginary creator God or his alleged Son, Jesus Christ. And even if human beings themselves were to cause the earth to perish or destroy it through their madness in terms of military and scientific destruction, this would in no wise be tantamount to a divine act of the end of the world.
16. Many human beings reading this interview will probably wonder where you get the certainty that everything is as you say. They will claim that a lot of things are just an assumption of faith, just like religions. What do you say to these human beings?
The human being is not obliged or required to take my words seriously or as true or to believe them. In principle, no human being should believe any things or statements, etc., and also not everything I say and explain. Belief makes you dependent and lowly intelligent, which is why human beings should never believe any things. On the contrary, human beings should always be critical and consider everything very carefully. Think everything through, fathom it, explore it, and thereby find the truth for themselves, both within themselves and also outside of their personality. However, this requires intellect, healthy criticism, and complete freedom of thought, as well as impartiality and impartiality in complete neutrality. And if these things are given as a whole, then human beings are also able to fathom all things and recognize the effective truth, which they find on the basis of actual facts. Recognizing the truth through its actual establishment, however, when all given and real facts and aspects are investigated and the result of effectiveness emerges from this, has nothing whatsoever to do with an assumption of faith. There is never room for belief in the actuality of truth, only effective reality. And it is this effective reality that gives me the certainty that the truth is actually true and is also the truth that can also be recognized in creational nature and in all its laws and recommendations by all those human beings who observe. Observe, explore, and fathom everything with open senses and an open mind. Of course, there are know-it-alls who deny this truth out of principle or for the sake of their image. But you can only feel sorry for these human beings because they are living without the truth, and therefore also without real life. Others, on the other hand, deny this truth for religious or strictly sectarian reasons, but here too, every sensible human being knows that they also miss out on real life.
17. How did you acquire your great knowledge?
I had to learn and keep learning from an early age. Before I also went to school, I was taught by an extraterrestrial named Sfath, and taught many things and facts, as well as the creational natural laws and recommendations. Sfath was an Ishvish, a man with the title Wisdom King, which in earthly language terms is referred to as God. On the one hand, he taught me normally from human being to human being. And on the other hand, this was also done through technical hypnosis apparatus, which imparted a tremendous variety of things, data, and other knowledge to me. So I became knowledgeable and instructed in many things, but this soon led to me becoming lonely and only seeking out adults to talk to, such as one of my teachers and a lovely vicar. Even before I had finished school, Sfath took me to the Himalayan mountains near Darjeeling in India on several occasions. An old Buddhist monk lived there who also taught me many things, as did other monks in India later on, where I lived on various occasions. I also always learnt on my own initiative, and later also through an extraterrestrial called Asket, who came here to Earth from our twin creation in the DeepL universe.
18. To return to the beginning of our conversation, what is the meaning of our lives?
The meaning of life is evolution, that is to say, further development, continuous higher development. The purpose of evolution is to achieve the highest possible development, which includes love, harmony, ability, knowledge, and wisdom. The purpose of evolution is not only to bring human beings to a high level of knowledge and wisdom so that they can lead a life in accordance with creation, etc., but also to help creation itself to evolve. For just as human beings and practically all life are in need of evolution, this applies equally to creation, and thus to universal consciousness itself. Creation is also only relatively perfect, and therefore requires evolution in order to be able to work its way up to higher forms of existence. And the path to this is the human being, who evolves over billions of years into the pure creation energy form, and in this form then further up into ever higher forms of existence, namely up to the petal plane. From there, the transition into creation, into universal consciousness, takes place, whereby a unification, a becoming one, takes place. In this way, creation then absorbs the former human form of creation energy, which has been formed to the highest possible perfection, and which once emanated from creation as a part of it, in order to evolve via human beings. With the becoming one, the accumulated knowledge and wisdom also enter creation, which thereby evolves again by a tiny iota, and after a certain time becomes the next higher form of creation, which also evolves again, and so on until, after an unthinkably long time, It integrates into the absolute absolutum, the highest and all-encompassing form of creation, which also requires continuous evolution into all omnipotence and temporal endlessness.
19. What would you advise a human being to whom religions can no longer provide satisfactory answers? What should he do?
Such human beings, as well as those who do not belong to any religion, etc., and cannot find any satisfactory answers regarding the meaning of life, etc., can only do one thing, and that is to search for the truth within themselves and also actually find it in order to create authoritative, useful and truthful knowledge instead of accepting any false doctrines on faith and losing themselves in them. The principle is, seek and ye shall find. However, it must be borne in mind that only those who really seek and make a sincere effort to find what is correct and good will find it, because the real truth is not as easy to find as all the falsehoods of religions and sects that are offered and sold as truths, but which in reality only correspond to false teachings that are aimed at making human beings dependent on them and enabling them to exercise might over them and exploit them. And many unfortunately find the wrong path in this direction, towards religions which have been known since time immemorial as the opium of the people, because they cloud the senses of human beings, as a result of which they no longer see reality and truth and lose all self-responsibility, which is so necessary in order to be able to lead a good and balanced life that is correct in terms of creation and nature.
20. Isn't the human being powerless in this day and age? When I see all the wars and the misery on Earth, some people wonder what they can actually do.
The human being can do a lot, first and foremost for himself. The human being is always closest to himself and must therefore first and foremost be concerned with educating himself, evolving, and, of course, keeping himself alive. However, this must be done in a wise way that is in accordance with creation, and therefore requires that the individual is always and completely responsible for everything and anything they think, act, feel, sense, and do. The individual must therefore work on himself and become a real human being, because everything begins with the individual, and the whole of humanity is made up of individuals. If the individual becomes good, sensible, and responsible, then he carries this to his neighbor, who may also strive to become better, more sensible, and more responsible. And that person then passes it on to their neighbor, and so on and so forth. It is not the great mass of humanity that can be changed, and it is not the great mass of humanity that will change for the better, but it is the individual human being who does this. And this individual then carries his new way, his knowledge, his love, his harmony, his peace, and his sense of responsibility, etc., out into the world, to his neighbor and his neighbor next door, which ultimately creates a system like a snowball fight. So the question is not whether the individual can do something or whether he is powerless, but the question is, why does the individual do nothing? Because it is indeed up to the individual to ensure that all the evils can be remedied and that everything changes for the better. However, this action lies first and foremost in the fact that the human being as such reflects on himself and works on himself in order to make a true human being of himself, although this can only happen by finding the truth. And once the truth has been found and you have actually become a real human being, you can also do a lot outwardly by summoning up your courage and standing up for the truth and a better life, and for a better world and a better way of thinking and acting for all humanity. This also includes, for example, standing up for the fight against overpopulation, against discrimination against women, and against child abuse, against torture and the death penalty, and against xenophobia and racial hatred. But it also includes the fight for animal welfare, for nature conservation, and for environmental protection and the preservation of planet Earth. And of course, it also includes, not least, helping fellow human beings wherever possible and appropriate. Nothing can be expected from the masses of humanity, because they stubbornly live in their indifferent and self-centered rut. It is therefore up to the individual to become more open-minded and accessible to the truth, in order to draw his neighbors and super-neighbors along with him. This is the only way to change humanity as a whole for the better, and to preserve life and the world.
Thank you very much for the conversation.